Guess what, guys? We've got breaking news. It looks like the reach marker bug fix has just hit Tribble, and apparently Hoarder for Doff is a thing.
On tonight's program, we got some bug fixes to talk about. I'm glad we can sort of respond to the people who have said, why aren't you working on this with, yes, they have been working on this. Plus some advice for new authors.
It's a mission that you think is fun. It's entirely possible and in some cases probable that not everyone will like it.
And we had a Kestrel flying her out in the studio.
Kind of started for me one day when Daniel Stahl, the EP, said, so, if you were going to have a playable Romulans, what would you do? And I said, well, the first thing you have to do is ask what kind of Romulan you've got.
Join us for the Foundry Roundtable. Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering this Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogan1701, and because we have something really cool for you guys tonight, in lieu of a goofy intro, I'll just say that with me is Markhawkman, Hippiejohn and Greendragoon. Our special treat tonight is we have Christine Thompson, better known to all of us as Kestrel from Cryptic Studios. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
We're very excited to have you on the show because, of course, as Foundry authors, we're very interested in video game writing, and who better to talk to about that than you?
Well, thank you. There are some really cool Foundry projects I've seen. You guys have some really, really creative stuff going on.
Thank you. High praise. Mm-hmm. Tell us about yourself and what you do at Cryptic.
I am the writer for Star Trek Online. I've been doing this for, almost 5 years now. I think it'll be 5 years in September. Before that, I worked in publishing on Cryptic. I wrote websites and did community management. Before that, I was in newspapers for 13 years. I was a writer and editor for several different newspapers. So I decided that video games were a lot more fun and a lot more creative.
That's for sure. So is the writing that you do for Cryptic sort of more in the abstract sense, or is it directly writing dialogue for missions?
It is actually both. And in fact, until 2 minutes ago, I was in a meeting planning for what we're going to be doing next after Legacy of Romulus, and we're talking high-level story elements about, who are the opponents going to be, what's the story, what sort of questions are we going to be asking in this, that sort of thing. But also when it gets right down to the nitty-gritty, I'm in the context, working on dialogue, I even write the microtransaction copy. So there's a lot of work. Detailed. Yeah, so it's a little bit of it's kind of strange because I am the only writer on the project, but anything word related somehow ends up heading my direction. Like yesterday I was naming something for the new fleet holding that's coming out. That sort of thing. It's all no 2 days are the same.
That's quite a variety. Yeah. So when you get into mission writing, sort of, how do you approach it? How do you get started?
Yeah, well, how we get started normally is first there are high-level meetings with the leads and the Stahl and the other producers, and we're talking about, okay, what do they want to see? All right, we're doing an expansion, and you're going to be able to play a Romulan, or we're going to have a featured series and we want the Jem'Hadar to be in it. And you have these really high level meetings and, maybe people have story beats they want to see, or, I want that really cool moment where all the ships decloak or whatever. And so then we go and we start working on outlines at that point. And at that point I'm doing really high level outlines of, okay, well then there's some this, and, then there's this, there's this Riemann, and he's on the, and he's got this plan, and, once we have the outlines done, then I'm going to be working with the designer of the actual episode, because they're the ones who are putting the gameplay together, and they know gameplay. They're the experts. They know what's fun. So we're going back over that outline again, and they're saying, well, I could do X and it would be a lot of fun for play. I was like, well, if you do that, we got to change this in the story. And then we're just going back and forth that way. And then there are play tests and everybody gets to add feedback and, okay, well, I didn't understand this point and what about this point? And then we're just iterating on it until it's ready to go.
That was going to be one of my other questions is, sort of how do you see your writing as it gets integrated throughout the rest of the process? I mean, are you there sort of every step of the way?
Luckily, I sit right in the middle of the design team, or of the content designers. So, I've got Charles to one side and Christopher Dodds to the other side, and so I'm pretty much there every day. But also, as playtests go through, or as stuff is built up enough that I can get in it myself and play through it, I get to see most things as they're being built up, and sometimes they're surprises. You just roll with it and go with that.
So can you sort of, as you see them working on it, can you sort of suggest, hey, what if we change this word to such and such?
Absolutely. And every designer is a little different. Some of the designers like to do a lot of their own dialogue, and I just go through and say, hey, why don't we change this? Why not, like Jesse Heinig's really good. He does a lot of his own dialogue, and then I just go through and the two of us work together just to make it right. Other designers, they've got other, what was that?
It's kind of like proofreading?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Other designers, they've got other stuff they want to work on, and they will just say, we had one guy that said text goes here, but most of the time they'll just basically say, all right, well, this is what's supposed to happen here, and then I go through and fill it all in.
Sometimes I do that in my own mission. I'll just, this is a test.
Pretty much.
Before I put in the actual dialogue.
Some of our original cutscenes are really funny before the dialogue gets in and the voice and anything like that, because we'll have a cutscene and they'll have like just a Romulan or somebody standing there and he'll be going, "Rawr, I'm a mean Romulan."
I know sometimes I will put temporary text that says things like "conversation about this."
Yes, we're always a little hesitant on temporary text because we had a few things that somebody put in to like make me laugh or whatever, and they accidentally got in the game, and we had to fix them later. So.
I have seen that happen in like newspapers and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
some of the data chips on New Romulus seem to have had that sort of issue.
Oh, the ones that said text. Those were my fault. I actually did those data chips, and I set up all of the missions and perks and such that went with them, and then I was going to fill the text in all in one big chunk, and there were a couple I missed. They have been fixed.
It's too bad. I thought it was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
So here's sort of it's a pretty specific question, but it's one that we have talked about a lot in writing, is how do you approach writing dialogue for player captains and bridge officers where you don't really know what their race and personality is going to be?
That is one of the interesting things about working on a game like STO as opposed to something like a Mass Effect. You guys create your own characters, and you're the stars of the story, so I don't know if it's male or female or a Vulcan or an Andorian or a human or Romulan or whatever. We have had to make the dialogue a little more middle of the road because of that. You can't really have like Vulcans cracking wise all the time. But you start to, you're like, okay, you don't want to like suck all the personality out of it either, but you have to kind of hit that middle of the road thing, where as opposed to a game like Mass Effect, for an example, okay, you're writing Shepard, this is their background, this is their personality, and you can write very specifically to that. It was a little bit of a change in Legacy of Romulus, because we knew where your character came from, and we knew a little bit about what had happened to them, and we knew they had a buddy named Tovan, so that changed a little bit.
So do you think it was maybe a little bit easier?
In some ways it was easier, in some ways it was harder. It was easier because, like I said, you knew a little bit about the character you were writing for. It was harder because I very much want the players to be the stars of the story. And when you're focusing a lot on NPCs and such, you start to lose that focus. So you have to continually remind yourself, all right, this is the player story. This isn't Tovan's story, and it isn't his sister's story, or is it Sela's story. It isn't any of those stories. It's the player story.
Had to make sure that they were supporting characters rather than main characters. Mm-hmm. And of course, Tovan's an interesting one because he's, the first bridge officer with a personality and story built in.
Yep. And then there's Lieutenant Kagan on the Klingon side now, who's not quite Tovan. But he does have a personality, and you know where he came from, and he's not just random bridge officer number 2.
Very angry.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I have not played much of the Klingon side, but Hippiejohn here has.
Yeah, Matt Miller did a really excellent job on the Klingon stuff.
That was Matt Miller.
I remember when the Klingon tutorial, your first bridge officer you got was Gorn.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like how with the Feds you get this Andorian,
mm-hmm.
but with the Klingon droids you get this Gorn. I was actually kind of hoping that instead of creating a new character for that, you would just write a backstory for the Gorn. But
yeah, it ended up not being that way. But to answer another question somebody else asked, Matt Miller is one of our content designers. He joined the team before and around, I don't know, December-ish, I guess. He did a lot of the Klingon stuff for Legacy of Romulus.
I know people have been enjoying that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that we were sort of kicking around right before we called you is wondering how much other people contribute to the writing, if it is just you doing everything or if it's just a very collaborative process.
Everything is a collaborative process here, which is one of the cool things about working at Cryptic. So, everybody's got their part to play. And where I am the one actually getting in and writing most of the words, there's been a lot of collaboration up to that point.
Now, has there been any thought given to stories where you can go in very, very different, divergent paths?
It's always something we've thought about, and it's something we will continue to explore. One of the biggest drawbacks to very, very divergent paths is if you have a path A and you have a path B, that's twice the work. So, then you have some games that have the almost illusion of paths. You have a choice A or you have a choice B, but they both end up leading to C. That's a little less work, but, it's just a matter of the size of our team, how many designers we have, and the producers and the directors and Perfect World and everybody's priorities on what we're going to get done. So a lot of those decisions are made way above my head, but we're always going to consider divergent paths, and that's something we've talked about, and it's something we're going to keep talking about.
This is something we've struggled with in the Foundry as well.
Oh well, yeah, and
we've had to do that. A or B, both you have to equal C. So
yeah,
because the way Star Trek Online has the mission set up, you always
linear.
end up in the same place,
yeah,
regardless of how you get there.
I know I haven't been able to play around very much with the Foundry and Neverwinter, but I know they've had some advances in branching dialogues and such that hopefully will get ported over to Star Trek.
We've all got our fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah. We all have our fingers crossed about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically, back when, I imagine this took place well before even New Romulus was launched, basically, how did Legacy of Romulus come about? I mean, where did you guys start?
Well, I know we were talking for a while about what we could do to add a new experience, and it kind of started for me one day when Daniel Stahl, the EP, said, so, if you were going to have a playable Romulans, what would you do? And I said, well, the first thing you have to do is ask what kind of Romulan you've got. What do you want the story to be? Do you want it to be a spy story? Do you want it to be a survivor story? Do you want them to be the bad guys? Do you want them to be trying a different way? And this was almost before New Romulus itself ended up. We were in the process of doing New Romulus when we started talking about this. And so from there, started hashing out, okay, what's this experience going to be? And we said, all right, we want to go do more with New Romulus. We want to, but okay, well, New Romulus is there. It's already done. You see the result. So, somewhere along the way in one of the meetings, and I can't remember who originally said it. It might have been my lead, said, well, why don't we tell the story of how you got there? And so that's how, from there, we started hashing things out. And at that point, you start deciding, all right, how many missions is it going to be? How many levels? And then you start working on the individual arcs.
Can I ask the question there, to address that exact same question? Because you guys did a lot of work on the Klingon side of things. You really did. That story is expanded in so many beautiful ways that where did the process of taking what was already there and had been there for 3 years, how did that process work?
Well, a lot of that was, okay, if we're going to have playable Romulans, we have to go back and work on the Klingons, because we can't say, all right, sorry Klingons, you still only get 25 levels and everybody else gets 50. That just wasn't fair. And it was something we all wanted to do for a long time, but we knew we weren't going to, because Romulans were going to take up so much of the team's effort, we could not totally devote, we couldn't build 2 expansions at once. So, it was like, all right, well, how do we take what's there? how do we expand it? How do we make it better? And that's where a lot of the Klingon stuff came up.
So there's a huge storyline, so I assume there must have, on two sides even. So, I mean, there had to have been a lot of collaboration, right?
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, Matt and, it was actually Matt and Stahl who really took the lead on the Klingon side, and I think they did a fabulous job. And then I was pretty knee deep into Romulans, so.
I've always gotten the impression that Stahl does really like Klingons a great deal. Yeah, I've always gotten that impression.
There are a lot of us who are Klingon fans on the team. I enjoy writing Klingon episodes. And when Alpha came out, they decided they were going to make a Klingon-only episode, and we were going to put it in, and they said, can you come up with a concept for it? And I turned in 3. So, because I like writing for Klingons. There's a lot of fun on that side of it. I have a max level Orion myself, so, there's the perception that we, sit around and talk about how much we hate Klingons around the office is not true.
So did any of your other ideas make it in anywhere?
The other two are, I think they're pretty cool because one of them could be this, actually one of them kind of got overridden by what we did for Legacy of Romulus for the Klingons. The other one I think could really work, so I'm going to have to go back to it and see if we can get it in.
With a, basically, this is the first expansion you guys have done. Mm-hmm. What were some of the challenges for writing for this much content?
This was essentially doing another game in like 6.5 months. So it was pretty intense. We were in here a lot. It was just a lot of time, everything had to be kind of compressed, and you had to think about a lot of moving parts going on. It's the biggest expansion. It's a full expansion. It's the most content we've ever done. It's the most voiceover we've ever done. So just coordinating all of that was a huge effort. And I will say that I kind of forgot how to have free time. A couple days before Legacy Romulus launched, the Cryptic took us out and we all went to see, Star Trek Into Darkness. And,
we saw a lot of Twitter pictures from that.
Yes. And my husband actually works on Star Trek too. I think you guys have seen him on the forums as Frost, but,
we did not know he was your husband though.
Yes. Yeah.
That's really cool. We love Frost.
He's
absolutely
he's one of our big favorites.
I will tell him you said hello.
Tell him we want him on our show too.
But, we got home and it was like 7:00 and we're like, what do we do now? We've forgotten how to have free time. Maybe we should cook dinner?
You can do what Tumor Boy does in his free time, and find people to talk to in game.
Yeah,
and he does that sometimes.
Yeah, and our cat was just looking at us like, what the heck are you people doing here?
So I take it you guys put in a lot of late hours.
Oh, yeah.
So is there anything moving forward that you have learned from doing Legacy of Romulus?
That we need to really, if we're going to do another expansion, we really need to start planning it out in advance. What they're kind of doing now is scoping out what the next year of Star Trek Online, 18 months, I don't know. Like I said, a lot of these conversations go on above my head, is going to be, and what's going to happen.
What kind of lessons did you learn from the perspective of being, from being a writer going into doing something this big? Is it still the same, just making sure that you've got all that prep time, or what other lessons there?
It is so many moving parts is the big thing. It's sort of like when I started writing The Path to 2409, which is what I did as before I came onto the project and then a little bit after I came onto the project. I could not do 40 years of history for the entire Star Trek universe all at once. I had to say, all right, well, let's take one big piece of it. Let's take the Cardassians. What's going to happen to them? Okay, how is that going to affect everybody else? And sort of piece it out piece by piece. And that's something that we had to do for Legacy of Romulus and what we're going to do for what's coming up next as well. Also, I learned no matter how much you try to make a character likable, somebody's going to hate him.
We do seem to be having it as a player base sort of a love-hate relationship with Tovan.
Yeah.
I like him
camp.
personally.
Well, part of it, I understand. There are some people who are like, but I want my own crew. I want to write their backgrounds. I want to do everything myself. And that's what the experience has been up to this point. And so it was a little bit different. You get into a game like Star Wars The Old Republic and everybody's got a vet or everybody's got a Kira, and that's just accepted, and that's the way the game is made. Tovan being the first person that's happened like that in Star Trek, it was a little bit, it's going to take time. Some people are never going to like him.
An entirely different way of presenting the game that
right.
Some people just won't dig. They just won't be into it.
And one of the things I liked was that he could kind of be the voice. He could kind of be a Romulan voice. He could kind of have an opinion and say certain things like, well, I don't care what we do as long as we fight the Tal Shiar, that sort of thing. It was nice to have that character who had a voice who could say more than just, well, we're in orbit, Captain.
A little less middle of the road like we were talking about earlier from the other boss.
Mm-hmm.
So how is writing for a Romulan different than like writing for a Fed or a Klingon?
You have to, when you're writing for a Romulan, the first thing you have to remember is they don't have a prime directive. Same for Klingons. And none of them, what I like about Star Trek as an IP is that none of, Romulans, Klingons, Federation, none of them are the bad guy. They all just see the world different way. And so you have to kind of switch your mindset to how would a Romulan see the world. And there's so much of their culture that's, on deception and secrecy and such that the Federation doesn't have and the Klingons don't have either. So it's just three very different ways of looking at the world. And so you're going to take a problem and they're going to solve it three different ways. So you just have to kind of get into the Romulan mindset.
Do you watch a lot of the Romulan episodes? Did you go back and watch them all?
Constantly. We are always reviewing stuff. I'm always reading one Star Trek novel or another. In fact, I finished one last night and started another one this morning. Al Rivera, our lead designer, you guys know him as Captain Gecko. He organizes watch and eats every week where everybody gets together and brings their lunch in and watches a Star Trek episode. I'm constantly watching them myself at home. There are touchstones, so that's what you're going back to over and over because that's what the players know and that's what they want to see.
Yeah, touchstoning is definitely a word we use a lot on this show. So, with Legacy of Romulus now released, what can you tell us about what you're working on now? I
don't know if I can tell you anything. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about that. I can tell you
level of secrecy.
Yes. But we have been working on the next fleet holding, which is about coming out. That's already been announced.
It's on Tribble.
The dilithium mine? The
dilithium mine, yes. We've been finishing up the dilithium mine. We've been working on the summer event, which is actually pretty cool. I like what's been done with that a lot.
Which was accidentally leaked, as I understand it. But so tell us about the dilithium mine.
The dilithium mine is a new fleet holding, and it is another way for fleets to expand their influence and to get new projects, new gear, new things, but also a lot of the projects can give you discounts on the amount of dilithium needed for other projects in your starbase and your embassy. So that's pretty cool. And that will be good for smaller fleets, for example. This would be a really good holding to build up because then you're going to get a discount on all your stuff. It is not as intense as a Starfleet build. It's about equivalent to the embassy. It's really, really gorgeous inside. They took the dilithium mine and the crystals and they have kind of a Riemann feel to it. We've said that this is a Riemann mine that was originally run by the Riemanns, but then they licensed it to the Ferengi when they needed supplies for the survivors of Craterus and to fight their war against the Tal Shiar. And now the Ferengi, who are always willing to have somebody else do their work for them, are licensing it out to to fleets in exchange for protection and such like that. So you're getting a chance to do a little bit of your own, gathering your dilithium in exchange for helping out the Ferengi.
I just like that there's even a little bit of story attached to something like, a fleet holding.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you have to put in a lot of extra thought into what might seem straightforward on the outside.
Yeah, well, everything we do, you've got to think about how it got this way. Okay, well, all right, we have a ream in mind, but it's over by Deep Space Nine. How did that happen? So, you just kind of, story is a little part of everything.
Well, didn't Riker mention in the one movie that the Remans fought in the Dominion War?
Well, the Remans did fight in the Dominion War, yeah.
They were used by the Romulan Empire as sort of shock troops, as I recall.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's an explanation for why they're on that side of the quadrant.
Yep.
Yeah. So, since we're all sort of writers and amateur game writers, what sort of advice would you have for all the authors out there about writing for Star Trek Online?
Two big things I always say is, first off, write what you love. Because if you're not enjoying it, nobody who's playing it is going to enjoy it. So if you're, write what you want to write what makes you happy. That's the big first thing. The second thing is, writing for a video game or writing for a story that's going to be in the Foundry or something like that is different from writing a short story or a novel or a TV show or anything like that. So you have to approach it from that aspect. You have to think about the gameplay. You have to think about balance. You have to think about whether or not somebody wants to read 17 screens of dialogue before they get to the next step of what's going on. One thing I'm always wanting to do is look at a piece of dialogue and say, can I cut 10% out of that? Can I cut 50% out of it? Does it even need to be there? That sort of thing. Then you guys have a lot of freedom in the Foundry. You don't have to be middle of the road. If you want to write an adventure for a Vulcan captain with an Andorian first officer, and the Andorian's first officer's got a Bajoran ex-girlfriend, go right ahead. That you guys have got the freedom to do that.
I'm taking notes because I'm going to make that Foundry mission.
Well, Kirkpat's done a bunch of interesting things along with it.
Yeah,
he definitely has.
Well, one thing that I've done on multiple occasions is put into Foundry missions things that reference Star Trek the Animated Series, which, as far as I know, you guys have never done.
I like Star Trek the Animated Series. There's a few things in there that were interesting. In fact, I think that's the first time or the only time Uhura got to take the chair. But we tend to just avoid the animated series because a couple times I've brought it up with CBS and said, hey, what about X? They've been kind of, maybe not. So, so I know, I just tend to avoid it now.
Well, at least we got the Cations.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true.
They
came out of the animated series.
Yes.
Another thing I noticed when looking at the map of Alpha Centauri is that it has the vendor system as part of Alpha Centauri.
Yeah. We did not have to, unfortunately we could not, especially launch because of gameplay concerns, could not be as strict to like the star charts and such as we might have wanted to be. So some stuff had to be split out for gameplay reasons, and that's what happened.
Oh, sure.
Well, but what I was talking about with vendor system is that this is presumably the homeworld of the Vendorians, which we haven't actually seen in the game.
I'm not sure we will see them. They're not on the immediate radar. I've thought about them, but there are a lot of races and only so much time. So I'm not sure the Vendorians will make it, but they might.
And probably a
never
lot that you guys have thought about. Maybe someday.
Right.
Maybe someday.
I have what I hope is a fun question for you to answer that I often...
I can stay a little longer, so.
Hey, all right.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, I have what I hope would be a really fun question, which is, you've got 3 years worth of characters that you have created. I always like to ask an author, who is their favorite? I know it's kind of like asking, who's your favorite child?
Yeah, it
almost.
is.
But I always like hearing at least, like an initial, like, what's your
these ones
response?
won't resent you for it.
Off the top of my head, I will say Franklin Drake because he is so much fun to write.
He's definitely one that gets talked about a lot.
Yes. Franklin Drake is one of my favorites. Tanae is one of my Admiral Tanae, just because she's so different. and she's so strict on the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and if that means I need to blow away a few Romulans, that's okay.
You surprised me in Kittimer.
Yes.
She really seems to have this sort of like a simmering hatred for Romulans when you talk to her in the Romulan tutorial.
Mm-hmm.
Which is great to be able to bring out something that subtle in a video game.
It's something I really wish I could get more into Tanae's backstory someday, because I thought of one for her, and she actually was on one of the ships that was attacked by Nero, and that was one of her first experiences with Romulans.
Ooh.
So that's
interesting.
Kind
I
of
really want to
drove
see
her
that now.
career from that point.
If you ever get a chance to...
if Cryptic ever gets the okay from Paramount, you gotta write that.
Yep.
What about Zell?
Man, I want to go back to her and finish that story someday. That was originally supposed to be a 3-parter, and it never got finished.
That would be a question, actually.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever plan to do multi-part episodes?
Well, we have the featured series.
Right.
Multi-parters are a little tough. The closest we've gotten to is like there's something that's almost like a multi-parter in Revelation, and then the episode afterwards, which I can blanking on the name on Legacy of Romulus, where you end up on Mind Game. That's what it is.
Okay.
Because you go right through that gateway and you end up in Hippiejohn's ship, and City on the Edge and Past of Perfect are kind of were intended
like
to
that.
be.
Yeah.
The problem is ultimately with where in like a TV show you can say tune in next week, and the action kind of freezes and you tune in next week, or you start the next episode on Netflix or whatever. In a video game, you can say, well, I'm gonna hit the stores. I'm gonna go to Earth Space Dock. I'm gonna talk to my fleet. I'm gonna, run some events, and then I'm gonna get back to this next mission. So, that was like one of the big challenges we had in 2800 was, Deep Space Nine gets taken over by the Jem'Hadar in the first episode. Hope I'm not spoiling that for anyone who hasn't played it yet.
It's been out for long enough. I think we can spoil it.
Yeah. But, what do we had all sorts of discussions about, well, what do we do? Do we lock off access to Deep Space Nine? Do we, put a bunch of Jem'Hadar ships? Do you just, because you can finish that episode and then you can go back to Deep Space Nine and, hit the stores and quarks and whatever. And it was just something we ultimately decided, okay, we can't take a major hub away from players who aren't playing that series. So, we have to kind of leave that open.
Well, it did give Bayshore the ability to act as a sub.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys did put a social hub right next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a map that I absolutely love.
I
gorgeous.
love that episode, and I love that map. It all just turned out perfectly. I was so happy with it.
Now, was it a little bit different? I don't know how much writing you did on that one, but I think it would be probably pretty different to write for sort of a non-combat episode.
I did the writing for that one, and it was really a lot of fun to sort of dig into the lore and write all those little books and and such like that. When that was happening, we were sort of working on that right around the Christmas break, and I was staying in California for Christmas, and a lot of other people had taken vacation, so it was really quiet around the office. So I just got 3 days to just, sit here and write little books and stories and such like that without anybody else around, and I had a lot of fun with it.
That's something that probably not a lot of people think about, is that somebody had to write those books that are sitting there in the monk's room in Beijing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So actually, it was really cool being able to open up the book and have them actually have different, pictures inside each and every one of them.
Yeah.
It's very different from the way you guys normally do the fake alien text, where you have these, chunks of Bajoran writing that you stick in random locations that it doesn't even look like it means something because you see the same thing on 12 different buildings.
It was very Elder Scrolls.
Yes.
Where you could go and read every book. You could read every book in the game. So
I'd love to do more stuff like that. I really would.
I was going to say, do you see an opportunity there, or is that a way to maybe move more of the lore and the backstories that you have created? Is that a way things like those journals and books and reports, are those ways to move things like that into the game?
It's definitely a possibility. We look at all different ways to tell stories. I like things like that because they're there for the people who want to open up those books and they don't block gameway for somebody who's like, wow, just let me finish the mission already. Because, you've got very different types of players who play this game. Some of them just want to get on to the next thing or whatever, and some of them really want to dig into those books. So I like the multi-layered storytelling where you have that for the people who want it, but you're not blocking gameplay for the people who don't. But also, I've enjoyed being able to tell some Enterprise F stories that I haven't had the opportunity to tell in game, or maybe wouldn't even tell in game, because instead of telling a story, if we're going to be putting something in the game, it's going to be the story of your ship and your crew, not the Enterprise F. Mm-hmm. So, the stuff we've done for Star Trek Magazine, where we've actually told some Enterprise F stories, has been a lot of fun to do.
That might be an opportunity to get those in game, though, as some sort of log entry that you can access by doing a mission.
We've thought about that. That may happen at some point.
So I have to say that when you guys first released the Bajor ground map, mm-hmm. One of the first things that I did was log in as Mycation and find a way to get up on top of the buildings and then run around and look at everything from the rooftop.
Oh yeah, we know people are going to do that.
We've had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
So a question then is, I know that we have environmental artists that design most of the city or most of the ground map. From the standpoint of being a writer, are you able to say, I need there to be a cave, I need there to be, what kind of input do you have with those guys?
Yeah, it's a collaborative process. The artists are in on the planning meetings when we're talking about the story, and I can say, I need a cave, or I need a Bajoran city, or I whatever, and they can say, we can do that, or hey, how about we do this, and that would be cooler, that sort of thing. Okay. Alpha I was really happy with because I kept asking for a jungle, and every time I'd asked for a jungle before, we just hadn't been able to do it because of tech limitations. And this time around, we're like, okay, we've improved the engine and we've improved the way we do things, and the artist knows, and everything came together and we got actual jungle. I was very happy.
Has there been a lot of that change in how you do things from the beginning to where we are now?
Oh, we're constantly improving things. Always. There's a team at Cryptic that works on the engine and works on improving stuff. And then we have our Star Trek programmers as well who come in with special requests. Like Tovan took a lot of new tech. There's almost new tech that comes in almost with everything. I mean, the mission in the Alachi arc, where you're flying the shuttle over the planet, that took...
I'm sure that did.
Yeah. that took tech, stuff like that. And, our cutscene tools have improved so much since the game launched, which is pretty much why it didn't launch with cutscenes, because they were
there weren't many at all.
Yeah, so cumbersome to make. But, our core team made this really awesome cutscene editor, and we got that. And, so things are always improving, and we're always trying to use those improvements to the best possible way. I still don't have a spell check, though.
That's something that we've wanted for the Foundry.
Yeah,
forever.
So here's the question: how is it writing for voiceovers? Is it difficult?
Writing for voiceovers, there's some things you have to. There's some little things you have to do, like you can't put a character name except at the beginning or end of a sentence because there's going to be a really awkward pause. So it's a lot of little things like that, and also just trying to keep them short and succinct, and like looking at it and saying, does that really need that in the sentence? We have a campaign against the word that, and in voiceover because the actors hate to say it for some reason. They think it slows it down.
We do that in journalism too. I'm also a journalist, and so I know that you got to eliminate that.
Yeah,
wherever
so
you can.
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit more like writing for an actual TV script or a movie script, that sort of thing. But then I take all this stuff that we've done and I put it in big Excel spreadsheets, and then we do the recording. Either Scott, who is the content lead, or myself are in every recording session along with our audio team. So we can say, okay, no, that's not the way that line's supposed to go, or this is the context, this is what's really going on, that sort of thing.
So I'm sure you then must have gotten the chance to work with Denise Crosby.
Yes, I did, and
How
that was so much fun. She is such a great actress, and she's so much fun to be around. She's just a really, really, warm and welcome person. We had so much fun with her, and we hope she gets to come back.
I guess your cat likes computers as much as Heretic did.
Now, have they gotten you to do any of the voiceover?
I have done a little bit. I did a couple lines on the 2800 and actually the Cation officer on the Belfast, and I've done a little bit for Champions. I kind of hate the way I sound, though.
Everyone feels that way about their own
podcasters
voice.
run into that.
We only have about 10 or 12 women in the entire company, though, so we know every single one who's willing to get in front of a mic.
Now, speaking of Champions, I mean, have you done much writing for the other games?
I did, when Champions was in pre-launch, I did some stuff. I did some zone text for them and just some stuff that helped out John Lehman, who was the writer on Champions at that time. I did some helping out of Neverwinter when I was able, but we were so knee-deep into our own development, I wasn't able to do very much for them. But most of the time, we have separate teams for each project at Cryptic, and everybody's always willing to pitch in and help out and play in somebody else's sandbox. But it depends on how much extra time you've got and such like that.
Which, of course, lately has been 0.
Right.
Which of all the missions you've done, would you consider was the most fun to make?
Most fun. Wow. They've all been fun in some point or another. There's a lot that have been memorable. Bejor was very memorable for me. Temporal Ambassador was very memorable for me. Coliseum and Cutting the Cord. Actually, the whole Romulan featured series was a lot of fun. Those are the ones that really stand out.
Okay.
Mind Games was just because it was just so crazy. There's so much going on in that
had
mission.
some wild stuff going on in there.
It's definitely generated a lot of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think myself, it's one of the highlights of the whole Romulan faction.
Yeah, it actually was a lot of fun to do the VO too, because when we were working with Denise, I was like, and I had this whole mile of mini contacts for her to do. I'm like, all right, you're doing an angel, and I was explaining the episode to her, and I was like, we're doing an angeler and devil thing on your shoulder. You get to be the devil. She's like, yay!
Always seemed to me like she had a little bit more fun with the Sela character than
yes. She loves the Sela character, and part of it was because she got to help concept it. So, Sela's kind of her baby. So, and Sela's story's not done. There's more to tell there, so.
Yeah, we gotta figure out what happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Subject of much speculation.
He was only, about 50 years old or so? I mean, for Romulan, that's relatively young, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, do you have a mission that you wish you could go back and redo?
Very much so. The Zell mission, I really want to redo at some point, because like I said, 1 is the first of a 3-parter, and we never finished the other 2 parts. 2, did not turn out the way I wanted it to. Some of the Cardassian stuff I would like to go back and redo. A lot of the stuff that we did early on we're looking at now, and especially after Legacy of Romulus, and we're like, okay, well, what can we do to make this stuff better? Because you can tell the difference in 3 years of tool development and 3 years of experience and learning what players like and what they don't like, and just getting better at our jobs. So at least I hope we are.
You definitely raise the bar for yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to say that I mentioned Zell simply because that's one of the few missions in the game where I played it, and I just had this intense urge to, go back and shoot the NPC in the face just because I don't like them.
Yes.
It definitely elicits an emotional reaction.
You know, I kind of intended it to elicit an emotional reaction. The original idea was, you know, like I said, as a first of a 3-parter, was to kind of set you up where you're like, damn it, now I gotta go fix this. The problem was you don't get the payoff, and that's why I think...
You don't get to go fix it.
Yeah. But like, one of my favorite bug reports I've ever gotten, and it just made me so happy, was Franklin Jerk is a super jerk, and I want to punch him in his jerk face. And I was like, yes, I have achieved my goal.
Mission accomplished with him, yeah.
The more they're talking about, the more you've succeeded.
Yeah.
So that was a good interaction. This is one of the questions I asked like last week to everybody is what was some of your best interactions with players?
It is so nice to get to talk to players. So many people are so helpful and appreciative, and you just love it, and you get to hear about how what you've done has affected them, and that makes it all worth it. And, you know, if you guys are having fun and being creative and such, that's great. That's what we're here for. MMOs are like building a set of tools and then seeing what other people do with them. It gets rough sometimes. Some people can be like super hypercritical and, you don't want to like dwell on, there's a point where you have to kind of say, all right, I'm not going to read the forums anymore today. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Gripe about that Defense of New Romulus mission. Almost.
Yeah, I know as Foundry authors, we've gone from like the heights of this is the best mission ever down to the lowest, this is horrible, 1 star.
And that's, you're kind of welcome to being a game designer because, we know that no matter what we do, no matter how awesome it is, there's somebody who's going to be like, worst mission ever.
Someone's not going to like it.
Somebody's going to be the comic book guy.
Somebody will be the comic book guy, so you just have to kind of accept it and roll with it, but also listen to what they have to say, and, nothing's perfect, so there's always things we can go back and make better.
Even in the worst possible feedback, there's always some sort of wisdom to glean.
Right. But yeah, don't stress the 1 stars, guys. I know it upsets the Foundry authors. I understand. Don't stress them. Some people you're just never going to make happy. Other people have got other things going on. Like I said, make what you love, make what makes you happy.
Absolutely great advice.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would like to say, is there anything that you want to let people know about? As a writer, maybe not just within Star Trek Online. Is there anything that you want to say? Open the floor to you.
Like I said, have fun with it. Write what you love. Be excited about what you're doing. That's what makes it all worth it. Oh, and get Star Trek Magazine because I'm really happy with the stuff we've been able to do there. So go get a subscription.
Little plug. We'll let you get away with that.
Yeah. And there's so many other little pokey things that I work on my own time. When I have those finished, I will be more than willing to pimp them, but
that great American novel that's just going to take the New York Times by storm, right?
Everyone's working on one, aren't they?
I'm sure I have one in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I guess thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I was glad to come.
Absolutely thrilled to have you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's move it along to Foundry news. Greendragoon, why don't you go for it?
Well, we've actually had a lot of Foundry news. Nothing huge per se, nothing like front page, but
important.
But a lot of little important things. Of course, the biggest one was Priority One's interview of Daniel Stahl, which they finally asked him Foundry questions. And we actually got an answer back from Dan on what I think can be called the future plan of the Foundry. Or at least the plan up for the next 6 months or so. Basically, he went on to say that they are literally waiting for the official launch of Neverwinter, at which point the internal code will go gold standard, as he called it. And from that point, then the code in Neverwinter is official, and then the the STO programmers can then start looking at the Foundry code in Neverwinter and saying, what can we pull over? He did say that,
of course, the official launch is next week.
Yeah, June 20th.
20th.
So this piece of news makes me happy, but it doesn't make me happy at the same time, because I really was looking forward to that interview, because so many people, at least 3 or 4 people, went in there and asked questions about the Foundry, and I was really, really happy to see Tony, or to hear Tony ask him about the Foundry. And what I heard was exactly what we heard a year ago. And he admitted that. He admitted that during the podcast, that, during his interview, that this was exactly what he had said a year ago. He had that this wasn't anything really new. This information was exactly what he told us a year ago. He mentioned some of the specific features that he liked about the Neverwinter Foundry that he'd like to pull over. But what it was to me was the reason that it made me sad is that it was just the exact same news that we got a year ago. And
it's been in a holding pattern.
Yeah, it's been in a holding pattern. And what I guess it is to me is that the main part of the question for me got softballed at him.
I did notice that.
The main part of the question wasn't just a general, hey, what's up with the Foundry? It was really specifically, they have a tool that has been in beta for 2 1/3 years. 28 months. That part of the question was softballed at him at the end of the whole question, and it was answered. I don't mind that he trolled, what they said in the chat room was he trolled back at Kirk Fat, being like, yes, of course it'll always be in beta just to make Kirk Fat right, or something, along those lines. And it was funny, and it was definitely not taken the wrong way in my case. But what it was it wasn't a real answer. It was not even close to a real answer. They softballed him the part about whether or not the tool is ever going to get out of beta at the end of the question, where that was the primary gist of what people were asking about. We were not asking for a rehash of what we heard a year ago.
And I don't expect that you would get a definite answer for that unless he had a definite answer for that. I'm going to bet we are working on this now, and it's going to be here in our schedule. Mm-hmm. And if they're not ready to say that, they're not going to say it.
But they could.
I honestly
but
think
they
that's
could
sort of
be ready to say.
A polite way of telling someone didn't like the question. I mean, cause a lot of the time
that's what I got out of it. They could have just said, "Yes, we realize the tool is still beta.
He can't answer. He'll just give you some vague, non-committal comment like that.
It's sort of interview 101. You reject the premise of the question. If you're not wanting to answer that one, you move the conversation somewhere else.
And the problem with the question, and basically the reason I specifically originally phrased it as when will the Foundry be out of beta, was because it's not a set answer. There's no specific criteria to mark, this is what it means to get the Foundry out of beta. And at the time I was kind of trying to leave it open for Cryptic to basically fill that in and leave them open enough to define what out of beta meant. But at the same time, I think Cryptic at least at the moment, doesn't actually know what Foundry out of beta would look like.
That's entirely possible.
And it's not an easy question to answer, because it really requires that someone sit down and figure out, okay, these particular steps have to happen in order for the Foundry to be out of beta.
Which may be different criteria from what you and I might come up with.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's a good, bad thing. I like hearing Dan talk about the fact that there is a plan for working with the Foundry, and at least vague generalizations about what that might look like in the future and things that he likes. I didn't hear any promises in there, and I don't expect anything out of that.
We did get a few interesting things out of this. First off, we got confirmation, which is something we wanted, that the plan to pull Neverwinter tech back into STO is still in effect. I mean, it's been a year since we've heard this. And let's face it.
And if they were waiting for launch, obviously that hasn't happened yet. It's soft launch, as they say. It's been kind of weird. But, if that's what they were waiting for, then, obviously that's why it's taking this long.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I mean, in the past, Dan often talks about things he would like to see happen in the game, and in the past, people have taken that as, oh, well, this is going to happen then.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, but I mean, so if
in general, listeners, don't do that.
Yes, don't do that.
But of course, there's always the disclaimer with this that plans change, and when a year goes by without hearing anything, it's very easy to assume, has the plan changed?
True.
Or question whether or not what was said a year ago still applies.
Like I said, it was really good to hear him talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, first off, we got confirmation that the plan is still in effect. Second of all, we did get something of a timetable. Not so much for when everything will show up, but when they're going to actually start working on it.
Which I think is essentially, in the latter half of this year, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, as soon as Neverwinter goes gold, the programmers are literally going to start looking at it. Now, I don't imagine that it's 24 hours after it starts.
I imagine it's not going to be a swift process.
No.
Because there's a lot, I imagine it'd be incredibly complicated to pull something back from Neverwinter over to Stowe.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, he listed off, as Hippiejohn mentioned, 2 specific pieces of tech. He mentioned the interior editor and the 3D editor from preview mode.
Those are the 2 that he said
he called it the nudger or something like that, which was a perfect thing to call it. I love that.
Yeah. It's a great name for it.
But yeah, I mean, those are both, I mean, let's face it, I mean, if we could have 2 pieces of tech from Neverwinter, those would be at the top of the list.
Those would be right there for me, yeah. That's a very true thing.
So, getting back to, his, sidestep of the, beta question, I'm almost tempted to say, maybe we should kind of open it up to the forums and kind of start to get an idea of what would it take to get the Foundry out of beta? What definition?
What does that mean to you?
Yes.
So, after the interview, like I said, I kind of felt like the question got softballed in his direction, but what I did bring away from it was an idea that the Foundry is kind of bigger than just STO and bigger than just Neverwinter. What I kind of brought away from it, and maybe I'm thinking too grandiose here, is that they see the Foundry as a tool that they can use within any of their games because their code bases are so similar. Their code bases for how, the general champions is a lot like STO, is a lot like Neverwinter, and that maybe really what they're looking at doing is working on the Foundry as the Foundry rather than the STO Foundry or rather than the Neverwinter Foundry, but putting I don't know where I would go with that, but that's kind of almost
essentially centralizing it.
Yeah, it's almost the feeling I get.
Yeah, possibly. It's tricky because I mean,
but he did say that there are obviously a lot of differences between the Neverwinter and the Stowe Foundry, and there have to be because of course they're very different games. As far as Stowe is almost 2 games in one. It's the space game and the ground game, and there's a lot that has to go into that. I'm sure.
It's a good thing we already have a space map creator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're well covered there.
So, but yeah, man. I mean. Yeah. So, I mean, it may be one of those things that, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the Foundry is still being developed even in Neverwinter. Yes, obviously theirs is more polished than ours, but
I still can't drop NPCs into rooms properly. They randomly jump all over on me over there.
So yeah, I mean, I spent a whole 5 minutes before I got the Neverwinter Foundry to crash. So clearly, they're still kind of in beta over there too. So, what is out of beta?
Everything crash. That's a talent of yours.
You really don't want to port the bugs from a different version of the Foundry into the Stowe Foundry because then things will get really screwed up.
And of course, you remember the last time they ported something, which was patrols.
Ugh.
And they told us they did port that essentially. It was all screwed up the first time they put it in, and they had to remove it.
Screwed up.
And it's still kind of screwed up. They had to remove it, and they put it back in, and it's still kind of screwed up, especially, obviously, in preview. It's screwed up.
I think that's what messes up bridge officer pathing.
I think
that might be fixed. It is fixed on Tribble.
Well, Bob
cool.
pathing was something different, though.
I've not had a boss disappear on me in preview on Tribble.
Well, see, both things though
Hooty hoo.
at least a certain amount of the same pathing code though, because patrols you tell it where to go, but you don't necessarily tell it the path to use. It figures out its own way to get from point A to point B.
There's some calculations and navigation.
It may be a case that patrols may never work properly in preview just because they do require that pathing data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just something we have to work around.
But yeah, I mean, I think, us moving forward, now that we've kind of established that Cryptic doesn't know what out of beta means, and considering that the Foundry continues to be it's basically an experiment, and it still is, even in Neverwinter. It's an experiment in this new tool, and it's an ongoing experiment.
It's sort of an experiment in user-generated content in MMOs in general.
Yeah.
There are not a lot of MMOs that have a system like this.
So, perhaps, I think it's time for us as the players to go in and say, what would we consider the minimum for us to consider the Foundry out of beta? I mean, whether it continues to have the beta tag or not, because I mean, frankly, it's a label. Where do we think the milestone is?
Okay, I'm gonna make this thread right now, and then we're gonna see what people come up with and talk about it on the air next time.
Okay.
Or this time, if people are quick.
It could be a really great idea or a really horrible idea.
If you post a new idea before the end of the show,
you'll be on there.
Even though nobody's listening right now.
Yeah, but maybe they'll read the thread and you can put it in the thread. Who knows? So what was the other piece of Foundry news?
There's actually two other pieces of Foundry news.
I was going to say, because the interview was the big one that I knew of.
Yeah. Okay, so the second one was Brandon posted an update on the Foundry challenge that has been on hiatus since the Foundry went down for Legacy of Romulus. It was mostly just a bit of clarification, but basically he came out and stated that the deadline for the Foundry challenge voting has been extended indefinitely to resume based on when editing gets opened up. He did say that authors will get 1 week warning before voting is reopened to basically go in and make sure that their mission is playable. He did ask that authors do not make any changes unnecessary just to ensure playability. Don't go and rewrite anything in your mission. He said after that 1 week warning, there will be a 3 week voting period, the start of which Brandon will repost the voting information on the news. So the third piece of news,
I think that's more fair to the honestly to people that are in that challenge.
And it's just him getting in there and clarifying how things are going to work and whatnot. The third bit of news was. I said, go ahead, Mark.
I'm hoping that they've figured out what's causing the waypoint markers to be messed up, because that's currently the biggest issue that I've been seeing.
Well, that is an excellent segue into piece of news number 3, which was our favorite dev, Cryptic Frost, has been quite busy on the forums, especially even today, which is Thursday for us. He has actually been posting that a number of Foundry bugs have fixes in the pipeline.
Yay!
And in fact, Drogan was mentioning earlier that
one fix went live this morning.
So so at least one of the bugs.
The bug where things were you weren't able to interact with things through solid objects. So force fields, I believe, was one of the big culprits, and some people had put interactable objects below the floor, and I believe it was affecting that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we are getting reports of people who
Kirkbat mentioned issues with interacting with invisible objects.
Yes.
And
that was bug number 2.
Based on the descriptions I've seen on the forum, that might actually be an aspect of the not being able to interact with objects that are sunk into the floor.
I think he's not sure, because I think he was saying that it was either that or they might have gotten moved.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I mean, that is another one of the bugs that Cryptic Frost mentioned had gotten a fix. It was in the pipeline. And of course, the third one was the waypoint bug.
Yes.
Yay.
And he's mentioned that there are fixes, but he does not know when those fixes will go live.
Yeah. But he says, watch the patch notes.
Yeah, waypoint, it's simply a map display issue, though. It's not that the waypoint...
No, it's not. No, it's not. Mark, I can guarantee you it's not. My mission depends on a waypoint, and it's not there.
I personally verified that my mission, Babat's Legacy, does actually have the waypoints in the correct location. It's just that it displays one of them outside the map, but, you just turn directly towards the planet.
It's a mini map problem on that one, but it might be
I understand
two
that
different bugs.
On yours, yeah, it could be two different bugs, because mine,
maybe
you're
standing
in a Jeffries tube that literally is a 10-foot circular room you're standing in. The waypoint is right at the bottom of the ladder in that tube, and I know that it's there. The mini-map is showing me that it is somewhere far off to the northwest in the black space out in the middle of nowhere. And I cannot tag the waypoint. That if what you're saying is true, if it's just a mini-map issue, then the waypoint should still be there and I should be able to make the story progress. Well, I cannot.
I have identified at least one thing that's different between your case and mine. Mine is a space map. Like I mentioned, you just turn towards the planet, and if you fly directly
there you go.
towards
Maybe
the
it's
planet,
a space map ground difference, but
the
thing is you can't. The thing is you can't say that because it's a logic thing there that just because one thing is true doesn't because that solution works for some people. If you know where the waypoint is, then you can get there. Does not mean that it's going to be the solution.
I suspect that it's a separate bug that we're dealing with. Two different ones. I mean, yours sounds more related to the missing invisible objects that Kirkfat is finding, where something has gotten moved.
Something is just not where it's.
I mean, because I ran into one.
I wonder though, Hippie, is the center point of your waypoint inside something, perhaps?
I was thinking the same thing.
I don't think so. It's just within the room.
So it is above the ground?
Yeah. Well, if I can get editing again, yeah, it is definitely above the. Oh, maybe I did put it below the ground. I don't know.
It's a thought.
You probably just dragged it on there and didn't adjust the height at all.
No, I'm pretty certain.
There have been multiple issues in the past with line of sight.
But yeah, no. If it's under the floor, that would explain why it wasn't being able to be interacted with. I should go check it again.
You should go check it now and find it.
Yeah.
Because that's been an issue on the galaxy map in the game in multiple occasions, because people would attempt to go to a specific solar system, but for whatever reason, the point on the map you need to interact with was inside something.
Inside a planet or whatever. Yeah. I've
seen
a lot
of the vault. The vault is famous for this one because you couldn't actually fly inside the vault model. You had to work your spaceship into one of the cracks in
one of the little areas. Yeah.
And that was the only way to actually trigger the map transition. That was insane.
Yeah. I'm really glad to see these bugs getting fixed, is all I can say. I'm glad that someone reads the forums and knows that that's happening.
Well, I'm glad we can sort of respond to the people who have said, why aren't you working on this with yes, they have been working on this.
Otherwise reasonable people have started acting unreasonable regarding this downtime and the bug fixes and other things, and
people always go crazy on week 3.
Yeah, that's about it. That's it. It's week 3, isn't it? It's the Foundry's been down for 3 weeks. People don't have their editor. They're going crazy.
What was the joke that I made on Twitter this morning, Greendragoon, where you were saying this is an outrage, and I corrected you and I said no, you added an extra letter. It's an outage, not an outrage.
And then yeah.
Well, this is sort of a non-traditionally structured podcast for us this evening.
Yeah, a little bit.
So I don't know. Anybody got a good discussion topic?
Well, we haven't managed to set the record for the longest Foundry outage yet, so I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we're good there.
Yeah, we have not hit the 5-week mark. So
I kind of have something that occurs to me, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it necessarily. It's just kind of a topic for conversation that I'd like to throw out there, is there are a lot of people out there in various chat rooms and podcasts and all over the place that like to talk about this game. And sometimes, in various places out there that I have had that I've chanced to visit one way or the other, whether it's listening to a podcast or whether it's like wandering through someone's chat room or something. And we have proven, or rather I think that it's proven, that the community of Foundry authors and even the community of people who play Foundry missions is very small. Now, I don't have to agree 100% with someone's, decisions, their life decisions, their politics, or anything else to realize that there are a lot of people out there that whether I agree with them or not about other things, they are passionate and they care about the Foundry. And I've just heard in recent times from a lot of different directions negative talk about other people. I myself in the past and even today probably have been guilty of it. Negative, just kind of a negative overall vibe about, this person or that person or this thing or that thing or this piece of news and I don't necessarily, I guess maybe I'm just, too big of a hippie, kumbaya, let's all love each other here. But I want to kind of get a response from the community, from our listeners, from whomever, that how do we fix that? How do we say that there's, as a community, we Foundry authors are like 2% maybe of the entire player base of the game. And we shouldn't be bad-mouthing each other, or we shouldn't be letting people who, I don't know. I don't know. I want to speak to that. And I want to hear.
I think in any group of people, you're gonna have a huge spectrum of attitudes and personalities and all kinds of different things, and you're gonna have, with the nature of a a niche community within a game, you're gonna have all kinds of different people moving in and out of that community at any given time, and you're gonna get lots of different people with lots of different outlooks on things. Some of them are going to be what you might call negative. Some of them are going to be very positive. Some people are going to go through periods where they're very frustrated and lashing out, maybe, justified or unjustified.
As TWG has mentioned on the forum several times, the MMO community is fueled by caffeine and nerd rage.
We are a very intense group, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are. Very, very true statement to say that.
I mean, I know I've been plenty guilty of it over the years. Consider my old signature during one of the previous downtimes was, a countdown of how many days we had gone without the Foundry. Which is something that Kirkfat's sort of done this time.
Yeah, I saw that.
With his little sig that says, with the little red light next to everything.
Well, there's somebody else who has their signature is the doom and gloom meter. It's not really specific to Foundry, it's the game in general, but it's the same basic concept.
So I guess what it is I don't expect people to love each other in the world, but I expect there to be, I don't know, polite respect, and sometimes I don't feel that from certain parts of the community, myself included. As I said, I'm guilty. This has happened, but for me, it's often in a,
we get plenty of hippie rage.
Yeah, it's certainly, I try to not bring it to the podcast. I mean, I do a couple times, but things make me mad, but for the most part, I want to say, let's be friends.
Obviously, it all sort of exploded anytime there's a rewards change.
Yeah.
Because there is a certain population of players that do Foundry missions just for the rewards.
Yes.
And when you change that, they become very vocal, and they're not shy about any of it. And we got a lot
every time Cryptic reduces rewards for anything.
Yeah, it's probably game-wide, but...
Yeah, it's not just us. It's like if
but we sort of bore the brunt of some of it. That was for sure.
Yeah.
Not that we didn't necessarily stick our heads in the lion's mouth.
But I'm talking even beyond that. Like, I don't mind somebody who's not even a Foundry author, who doesn't understand what it takes to actually make a mission. If they want to wander around and badmouth and talk about how, our 2-hour missions, I've only ever written one that's 30, the longest was ever 40, 40 minutes, it's like, whatever they want to talk about, let them. I don't care. It's when other Foundry authors and when various parts of it's when this little tiny community of Foundry authors does things that are very unsupportive of each other. It's happened a few times, and it bothers me. It doesn't bother me to the point that I'm going to be like, must do something, but I'd like to hear people's response to it. Like, we're a really small community. If we could just find things to all, like, stand together and get behind, hey, fix this about the Foundry, it would be really great for all of us. I don't know. There are things that we all agree on. Why don't we focus on those instead of the negatives where we don't?
Because I think there are some things that we all agree on. And that was a point that I tried to make several times, even back during the Foundry War, is that, there are a few things that authors and the people who were pissed off about the rewards can agree on, which is, the need for better searching systems, for mission tagging, so you can sort of find exactly what you're looking for. There were things that we could all agree on, but, it was like you couldn't get through. You couldn't pierce the clouds of negativity, if you want to get really use some imagery there.
There you go.
So I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I know it's a tough topic.
There's no perfect solution or anything, but
like I said, I'm just really interested to hear, since I know at least some of the community listens to our show. I'm interested to hear what they have to say about it.
We need like a Foundry Author Summit.
A real round table, 30 people.
Yeah.
Skype support that?
How cool would that be?
Heck
with Skype. Let's meet in real life.
I'm pretty sure I could find more than just 30.
Well, and I would have to guess, though, that there are a lot of authors out there who do not really participate in the community aspect of it.
Yeah.
Who don't go on the forums, don't go in the chat room, may not listen to us. They just make missions, maybe for themselves, maybe for their friends. There's plenty of Foundry authors out there that I've played their mission and I've never seen them anywhere.
Yeah.
Forums, in game, anything. Which, if any of you do happen to be listening, join the conversation. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from any and all Foundry authors.
Well, also, there are many people who use a different forum name than their in-game name.
That's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since that whole PWE Cryptic forum merge thing.
Merger, yeah.
I happen to be able to get the same name, but not everybody.
I had to misspell my own name. How terrible.
Yeah.
I had to add a letter to my username, but I was able to keep the same forum name and @ handle.
Mm-hmm.
Which the @ handles didn't change, but
what other topics do we have to talk about here today?
I've got one. What do you guys think are some talking about writing, what are some traps that new authors can fall in that they should avoid?
Things like remembering to name all your NPCs.
Yeah, as simple as that, or as complicated as, one of the things that I always see with some new authors is they want to put in like every aspect of the shows that they loved. They want a mission with the Borg and the Romulans and the Klingons and the list goes on and on. It's like, they should focus.
I've seen several times from people who are new authors that they will fill in names for every single NPC enemy, and
I love those people.
The game automatically fills in the enemy's name.
But I love those people.
But it doesn't anymore if you reskin them, right?
Well,
automatically do it anymore.
It will fill in something, I think. But anyways, what I was getting at though is that this is something that Eric did a really bad job of in one of his missions. Is he filled in names, but he would put in like captain on the instant level guy, And
that's
so you have to be careful
to figure out. Yeah.
All right, so you have to be careful doing it, and that's a lot of loading up, saying, "Oh, that's the captain. Okay, let me reskin him and put the right name on all these guys." Granted, it's a lot of work, but I love the people who take the time to name every single person in that enemy squad. I love them.
Well, what I was thinking of, though, are situations where someone fills in generic names like Undine Captain when they don't need to, and
I think you're better off in that situation going with even more generic names where you just, Undine Soldier.
Undine.
Blank and let the game fill in a name for you.
I was going to say, if you leave it to default, it'll automatically.
But the problem is,
if you leave it to default,
it often would come up as Undine Captain 01 or Undine Captain.
I don't think
and that's where playtesting kind of comes in.
And the number for NPC enemies, I don't think it does.
If you've done any reskinning, it does.
I think.
Yeah, if you change them, it does. If you just leave them to default.
It's a result of when they did that merger of the two lines, because there used to be a line for the object name and then the name that you would see in game. They used to be two separate things. Now they're merged.
In Perry's case, he did not reskin them at all. He just manually assigned generic names to them when he didn't need to.
But like you said, where it would read captain, but it would actually be an ensign level mob. In that case, you're better off doing a little more on the generic side.
Yeah, I think the generic side there, but I mean, having, walking upon a group of Undine warriors, instead of just having them, read Psy Master or, whatever all of their different mob names are, to have to walk up and, unknown Undine Captain, and then after you've had a chance to discover more, you can have, Captain such and such or whatever. That's cool to me.
You could always name them without assigning a rank.
Yeah.
Use a proper name instead of a rank.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, I like when people do that, actually.
I always name all my ships.
Are really
Federation ships, anyway.
Yeah.
So, something I see new authors sometimes do is adding in the Borg for the thrill factor.
So I think this goes to what I wanted to talk about with what Drogan said, is adding everything, just throwing every kind of possible food at the plate and hoping that the person enjoys something. People use the Borg way too much. People use, there are way too many Klingon things in some cases, there are people who I've literally played a mission where I fought Klingons, Jem'Hadar, Borg, and there was a supposed story trying to tie all of this together. There were Hippiejohn in there too, I think, and I'm like, why are they all working together to try to kill me? This makes no sense. And I think the issue there is the more layers that you add to it, you have to explain why the Klingons are working with the Borg. You have to then explain why the Klingons and the Borg are working with the Hippiejohn. And every step that you take and level of complication that you add on there, it just becomes more and more unbelievable. And complete,
yeah, you never want the player to roll their eyes and say, "Oh God, another different enemy."
The Tholian
exactly
had a mission along those lines that had a very interesting premise. See, with this mission, the various enemy types you were fighting weren't working together. It's just that what you had to do, you ended up fighting a bunch of different types of guys.
I think that was my mission you might be referring to.
No, it was not your mission.
No? Because that's kind of what I did, actually.
This is one from someone who wasn't as good at writing missions as you are.
Oh, well, thank you.
I mean, I guess good writing
but I did do something similar.
Sure. But
because I tied it all together is that, because, let's see, what did I put? I put in Zenkethy, which of course isn't sort of my invention.
Yeah, I know.
Reskinned generic mobs, really. And then I put in Klingons from the future, and I put in Tholians. And all these people are... I tied it together by making all these people after something you have. There's disparate groups that are not allied with each other.
So kind of a...
that I was thinking of was the mission where you have to go and interacts with like half a dozen different doors on the Mulreheim ground map.
Oh yeah, I think I remember you mentioning that one.
The concept of the guy's mission was actually pretty good. It's just that he had several technical limitations and annoyances. I mean, I killed more enemies on the Mulreheim ground map going from point A to point B than I did inside the guy's mission.
Now that sort of brings me to another one that people fall into, which is maybe biting off more than you can chew with your first mission.
It happens a lot.
Yeah. You want to keep your first mission fairly simple.
Probably
simple and focused.
Actually. I mean, my actual first mission is something that I literally did not publish until I started talking to people in the forums about it because of just how awkwardly the mission had come out. And I decided to, that I basically didn't really know how to make the mission work properly, so I shelved it and literally left it shelved for 2 years until I talked to people on the forums about it, and someone told me they wanted to see it simply because it was odd. In case you're wondering, it's the treasure hunt with Tet mission. I may have mentioned it in one of the previous podcasts.
I think I've heard of that, yeah. One of these days, I promise I will get around to playing one of your missions.
It has no combat in it, and it's basically like one of the old Nintendo platforming games.
Oh, that's the one that Catstar played.
Yeah. Except instead of having neatly shaped platforms, you have jagged hunks of rock to jump between.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a perfect one for Catstar.
Yeah, Kestrel actually has a lot of fun on the map, simply because of the fact that Cryptic missions do not require player skill in jumping.
Yeah, not
they
usually.
have more walking than anything else.
Yeah, if there's jumping to be done aside from, was it infected ground? Do you still have to do the jumping on infected ground?
On Elite, not on normal.
On Elite you do, on normal they just have bridges.
Yeah, platform bridges, so you don't fall into a platform.
Of course I haven't done infected
I have
ground
just
in forever.
redoing STFs, which I hadn't done them since before they got all split up. So I remember the old infected, the one that would take you like 4 hours with the bad team. It was. I should say fairly good at it because I did fall on occasion. But I could do it for the most part. Without occasion, I might add.
So, something I wouldn't have thought of beforehand, but something I've seen a number of missions do is they will have some kind of new baddie, or perhaps even an old baddie, but some super powerful baddie that they want to show you how badass this new enemy is, that they will bring in, or they will hack the Borg. And
I remember one from one of the Foundry challenges where the person retconned the origin of the Borg as being the, I guess you could say, preliminary invasion force for some extra dimension or extra galactic enemy, and that when this extra galactic enemy showed up, that they more or less seized control of the Borg, and you used them as the shock troops in an invasion of the Federation.
so yeah, it's basically making the mistake of using the Borg as a stepping stone to prove how bad your new baddie is.
Well, isn't that what they called the Worf effect? Where they set Worf up as this, this badass warrior, and then
he got punked all the time.
Yeah, to show essentially how crazy awesome the villain of the week was, is that they would have him throw Worf around. Like,
that's kind of the same idea.
If he beat Worf, then he must be terrible.
There were a few cases where they did that with Data in 7 of 9, too.
Yeah.
But the problem, of course, that runs into that is that it gets to the point where if everyone's doing it, it's like
what they ended up doing.
They're not tough.
Yeah,
what they ended up doing is they made it into. It wasn't that everyone else was so tough. It was they made it into Worf was just kind of a sucky security chief because he got thrown around all the time.
Yeah, it took DS9 to make Worf a badass again.
Cool again. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, basically, if you have a bad new alien, make them bad on their own merits. Don't use something or use someone else to prove their badness.
Don't use something else to prove how awesome they are.
It's sort of a cliche that I always see in a lot of like action movies where, you know, at some point at the very beginning of the movie they will show the villain doing something with their combat skill or something that shows, you know, oh, they know how to combat, because you know that if they show that, that means at some point the hero will fight them, and it's incredibly obvious, and I sort of hate it.
Oh wait, you mean like the first moment that you see him, he's leaping off of the ceiling with his flowing black trench coat and kicking Klingon butt?
Yes.
Oh wait, sorry, you mean like that?
Yes, precisely. But actually, I think the most egregious one is Gladiator, where at the very beginning you see Commodus, you know, do a bunch of fancy sword moves. And so it's like, okay, you know, he's gonna fight. He's gonna have to fight this guy at some point.
Yep.
I don't know.
Because they went out of their way to establish his fighting skills.
Have you ever seen this movie called Big Trouble in Little China?
No, I've heard of it.
What? Wait,
Isn't it the Kurt Russell movie?
Little China.
Yes.
Yes.
You really need to go. You really need to go learn Jack Burton's lessons on life, bro.
I mean, because he ends up getting punked so many times in that movie, but in the end, he's the one who kills the big bad villain.
Yeah. You don't give him any spoilers, because if you don't know it yet, you really need to put it on your movie viewing list and go learn Jack Burton's rules of life. That's all there is to it. You really need to see this film. It's great. And I want to spoil it.
So we kind of moved on from new author mistakes onto professional author mistakes.
Mistakes, right? Yeah. I think the biggest new author mistake that I see is when somebody makes my hero not my hero should not just be I don't want to just be watching something unfold in front of me. I want to be a part of what's unfolding, and I've seen that a couple of times from new authors. I don't know if it's a common mistake, but I think sometimes people think that in order to move the story, they have to, I don't know, use everything around the player to do it rather than the player. So I've run into that a few times. That's all.
I'm kind of hesitant to mention this one because I know there are some authors who will disagree with me on this point. But watch your dialogue for bridge officers and captains. And I know there are some authors who intentionally will try to write specific dialogue, even though there's no guarantee that the player's character will fit that. But there are cases when new authors will write dialogue as they would say things, not realizing that the dialogue doesn't fit very well for a number of different species.
I think in the Foundry there is an issue. I know that I've heard people say that it was an issue for them when they first started writing, and I know that for the first 3 missions that I wrote, I found myself doing it, was everybody's kind of got their main tune or their main character that they play. And oftentimes when you're writing something, you imagine what your character would be doing going through the mission. And in doing that, you end up writing a story for your character, and sometimes, as you said, end up missing out on like someone else's race that's not going to be a Klingon in my case, or not going to be a human or whatever.
To a certain extent, when I do that, I have a variety of characters that I play on a regular basis. So when I go through it, I try to visualize what the different characters would say in various scenarios. I mean, because I have the one engineer character who is a Kryosian Orion hybrid, but she's a Starfleet officer, so she has a very diplomatic personality. Then you have this person who is a mirror universe Vorta, and she tends to be the nerdy type who, she's in some ways like Spock in 7 of 9, and that she really doesn't get most humanoid. And then you have this guy named Chuck, who is a Kazinti, who, he does the whole, I'm a warrior, you get out of my way or die sort of. Of course, Kzinti have a very different concept of honor than Klingons do. It's more of if you win, that's honorable. If you run for your life, that's not honorable.
But you're still ending up writing. You're still ending up writing with one of your specific characters.
Well, no.
What if? All right. So your Kzinti is very honorable. I get that, Mark. Like your Kzinti is very honorable. During the Day of Honor mission that we got when we got our cool new Batleth at the anniversary this year, that was proof that honor is viewed 6 different ways by 6 different people.
I take my 9 different characters and I try to find a dialogue option that would fit all of them reasonably well. I don't just look at
okay, so like a neutral option between all 9?
I mean, because, I have one character who, well, like I said, you have the one guy who's this extremely aggressive warrior type guy, and then you have this one person who's a diplomat type guy, and what I try to do is, come up with something that is, well, it's like what Kestrel said was you have something that's middle ground solution that would fit either one.
What you're doing then is looking at it from your point of view from 3 or 4 different characters and saying what neutrally works for all 4 of these. Is that what you're doing? Or 7, however many it is? Like you're looking for a neutral point of view between them? That's a question.
Something like that. What, it's more a matter of looking at the dialogue I've written and looking to see if there's something in it that would drastically conflict with the personalities of one of the characters that I've created.
See, I like that approach. Because that's different than writing for your character. That's different from writing dialogue like it's your character. That's instead looking at it like, would my character hate this? kind of thing. Which I think is good, because that way you'll see, would my character not like this? I would almost suggest that sort of approach makes me want to pass my work around and be like, hey, what would your character react to these kind of, options being? Rather than just basing it on, my few characters. So, that's a really good idea.
That's actually something that I've seen happen in Foundry mission feedback. Is they talk about, okay, this is what the player character ends up saying in the story, and this is why my character doesn't like that idea. I mean, with one example is Evil 70. He wrote a mission about a Prime Directive violation or something or other, and your player character has to go fix the problem.
Right.
However, at one point in the story, he has your character talking to a Vulcan. Your character confuses the Vulcan by using a baseball analogy. So, if the character you're playing the mission as is a mirror universe vortex, where do you think the baseball analogy would go?
Yeah, where does that come from?
You need a little option down there that says, reference mirror baseball. Which, of course, which has 9 batters and 1 fielder.
I really like the comparing dialogue against would this not work for me? Mm-hmm. That's a good different approach to it.
What would apply to all of these variety of different characters that I have instead of what would this one say?
Yeah. And just writing them you hope is neutral and seeing it from all points of view. I like that a lot, Mark. That's why I was trying to clarify what you were saying so I could understand it. I like it a lot.
As a few more examples, let's see here. My other 6 characters that I've gotten to VA on the live server, let's see here. One of them is Simulated T888. In case you're not familiar with Terminator, that's the one from the Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles. How does the T888 get assimilated? Never did work out the entire backstory of that, but you get it.
That poor show did not have enough time to get things like that established. Which is too bad.
Then you have...
That show has some of the best music videos ever.
Oh, yeah. Then you have an assimilated joined trill, or formerly assimilated joined trill. You have a Boolean who's, he's actually relatively boring. He's just this really big Boolean guy he's a Starfleet officer. Then an engineer who is a bit of a mad scientist, and like Hakiv, decided to enhance herself with cybernetics. Then you have a guy who's half Vulcan, half Romulan, and ended up in Starfleet. So, that's an interesting array of things. And my KDF character is, he's an Orion Marauder, who, he's kind of like the Orion medical officer from the board task, in that he's like, Honor, you're kidding, right?
It's good to have those, and these are things you can sort of tailor into options as well, and dialogue options, since we can do multiple buttons. You try and figure out something, okay, this would work for, say, these two characters, this would work for, a different dialogue option would work for this character. It's what I called before on a previous episode, we called it the Mass Effect strategy, or Mass Effect technique, where, you provide, the 3 different options for 3 different kinds of personalities.
So I'd kind of like to swing it back to Dragoon's original kind of point about bridge officer speech and captain speech here, and like how a first-time author can sometimes get caught up in making this mission is this sort of character, and they just write like, we're going to hear in an interview, I don't know, before or after this, someone who's a story writer said the Foundry frees us from those limitations of having to be neutral, of having to write in a neutral sense. If we want to write, she said, if the Foundry wants, if you want to get a story out there with an Andorian captain and a Mugatu first officer and whatever you want to tell, the Foundry allows for that. Now, it's generally a different kind of storytelling to lock into that sort of thing. It kind of, to me, becomes more of using the Foundry like, kind of like a hollow novel approach in that sense, when you relegate these are the characters that you're using and whatever, but it is another approach. It is another fair approach.
I've
not necessarily
seen people that you have used it that way.
Yeah, I have too. It is another fair approach.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't so much a mistake that people make, but it's actually sort of a tip for new authors. Is before you go to sit down and write all your dialogue and whatnot, I'd almost say it's worth going through a couple of Cryptic missions and watching really closely how they do text formatting.
Yeah.
So like, how do they present their questions? How do they, what do they use in the title bar?
Make paragraphs within
where do they use green
boxes.
text? Where do they use orange text?
If for no other reason, then that's what people are used to from just playing the game. And it's jarring when it's not like that, I guess.
Yeah, so.
And that's a good thing, Dragoon, thank you. Because we're getting towards the end of our time limit here. So let's wrap it up with one piece of advice for new authors from each of us. So, we've got Dragoons. So Mark, what is your advice for new authors?
Well, do something, make a mission that you think is fun. It's entirely possible, and in some cases probable, that not everyone will like it. However, if you think it's fun, it's almost certain that someone else will think it's fun too.
Excellent.
Right. Good.
Which definitely was something that Kestrel mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Hippie, what is your advice for new authors?
Know your finish line. It's my favorite piece of advice I've ever read or gotten as an author, and that is know where you end. Every story has a beginning, middle, and an end, and know that last moment, because then you can always be driving toward it even when you get lost.
Great. Well, my advice for authors would be to focus. Is don't put up a bunch of things on the dartboard, throw a couple of darts and see where they hit. Find one thing, find one subject, one race of enemies, or one planet, and make your first mission very focused, and don't try and do it all at once. You have many different Foundry slots. You can do many different missions on many different subjects. So, you always got to save something for next time. That'll do it for us until next time. So, say goodnight, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. We're getting better at that, doing that all at different times.